And for Palantir, even though the PE and price to sales was very high, when I actually valued it historically, I would find it, it is trading undervalued. So I bought Palantir. I bought Palantir in the single digits, and now it's trading at 180. And throughout that time, it goes from overvalued to undervalued. Of course, currently I believe it is overvalued, but I mean, that's just a common misconception that you will never be able to buy these high growth companies if you care about valuation, because that's simply not true. So you have to make that distinct separation from pricing to value, because they are not the same.
Welcome everyone, this is Mariusz Konieczny. I'm chatting with Emir from TypeF. Emir, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you're speaking from Sweden right now?
I am currently in Sweden, yes, but shortly that will be from Japan in the summer.
Okay. Now, do you like Zlatan since you're in Sweden?
I actually I am originally from Bosnia. My parents are, and so is Zlatan. So we have that in common. But I actually do not.
So you have even more in common than.
yeah. So but I actually do not track football at all. I'm more of a Formula One guy. So yeah, obviously it's very famous, but not much relation beyond both being from Bosnia originally.
You know, Formula One is getting more and more popular because of the, or part of the Netflix Drive to Survive documentary. Yeah,
I just wrote an extensive research report on the business of Formula One, actually, and I'm very intrigued, and I'm very bullish Formula One as a company and stock as well. So yeah, it's booming over there.
So they're a public company? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's owned by Liberty Media that broke it out into its own separate stock. So FWON is the ticker. So yeah, it is publicly traded, and you can track it. And as you said, it was pretty stagnant before Liberty bought it up, even after. But with the Netflix series, it had a whole new boom. And I'll give you one statistic that not many people actually realize. So if I told you that 42% of the Formula One fan base is actually female, like that is completely crazy to me. When you think about motorsport, like you don't envision that almost half are actually female viewers. But yeah, that's an interesting statistic, and I think it's all thanks to Drive to Survive. About a third of the fan base today is directly from the show.
Wow, that's cool. Okay, so let's introduce yourself to my audience. Who you are, what you are about, your investment style, how you got started, and all the good things.
Yes, so I'm an equity research analyst, and I publish primarily on my Substack, which can be found at research.typefcapital.com. And I'm pretty unique in the way that I strictly focus on intrinsic valuation, which is fallen out of favor because it takes a lot of time. What's more common these days is that you look at pricing ratios, so something like PE or price to sales, and you compare to different companies. But the way I do it is completely bottom up, and publish that on Substack, including the valuation models, all the work. And I strictly try to focus on what I call mafia companies, the kind of companies that are very difficult to disrupt, the kind of companies that are just fortress-like in nature. So one thing that I avoid, which is completely contrary to what I call a mafia stock, is something like a consumer-facing company. I mean, we saw it recently with Netflix. They put out a show. Elon Musk has some opinions about it. He puts it out on X, and suddenly you have all this mass cancellation. So everything that is consumer-facing, I just don't like it, because for the risk that one bad headline can completely turn the business. I'm not saying that Netflix, is going to collapse due to this comment by Elon Musk, but I'm saying that it just shows the vulnerability of those kind of companies. So the kind of companies that I focus on, they're completely detached from that, completely detached from the consumer. Instead, they try to exploit the consumer without the consumer knowing. And that's the kind of strong business dynamic that I do like.
Do you mean business to business type of businesses?
It doesn't necessarily have to be business to business, but yeah, that is a core one. So I'll give you an example. So let's take FICO, for example. Are you familiar with FICO, the credit rating model?
Yes, for sure. Very strong. Yeah.
Yes. So let's say with FICO, they actually rely on the consumer to have their credit score pulled. Even though it is a B2B, they do actually exploit the consumer with their mathematical model. So similarly, there are some payment processing companies that rely on the consumer. So I'm okay with the consumer being in the loop, but I don't want to rely on them. For example, let's take a Nike. I don't want to have to pray that the consumer, or let's say that some famous person switches from Nike to Adidas, and that is suddenly a big problem, and now all my customers are leaving for this other brand. That kind of dynamic is what I'm trying to avoid. So
Would you consider a Meta, Facebook, that kind of company where the consumer doesn't pay for it, but then they use the data from consumer to sell all sorts of things to the marketers?
yes, so Meta is probably on the edge. I would still say that I would be willing to invest in something like Meta because they are primarily exploiting the customer rather than relying on them. It's just so integrated into society at this point. So for Meta, it is borderline. It's not like one of the strongest mafia companies that I would say. So let's take FICO, for example. They have over a 95% market share. They have a single competitor that sends their product for free, and still no one switches over. Like, they have this complete fortress, this complete monopoly that is more or less undisruptable. So that's more what I try to focus on and try to identify that kind of business, and that's what I primarily invest in and cover on my Substack.
Well, this reminds me of Warren Buffett's definition of competitive advantages or moats. Is this where it's coming from?
It is well, the companies do have a moat. Otherwise, you can't really claim this competitive advantage and this mafia status, as I like to call it. You can call it fortress, you can call it moat, you can call it mafia. But yeah, they have that in common. So yeah, it is pretty similar to that approach, I would say.
Okay. And how did you become an analyst, write about those companies? Because from what I understand, you don't work on Wall Street. You have a different job. So walk us through this.
Yeah. So currently, I do have a primary job, which is within the public healthcare system in Sweden as a systems administrator. So I took up the analyst profession, if you can call it that, a couple of years back. Actually, I started on Seeking Alpha, and I quickly transitioned to somewhere where I didn't have to deal with editors. For anyone that has written for Seeking Alpha, that is a tedious process where you can't really express ideas the way you want to. So that's why I started a YouTube channel. I started posting more on X, my research there, and ultimately now on Substack. So the core idea was that I was always very competitive in anything that I did, and the way that got me, interested in investing as a whole is that this is like a global battleground. Essentially, there are winners and losers, and you essentially have to outsmart, the global population. That's the way I saw it, at least, going back a decade or so. And as a competitive person, I really started to dig deep and try to understand all the different dynamics of the markets, what makes a business good, what makes a business bad, why the stocks go up and down. So I really dug through all the details, and that's why I got this passion for actual research. So that's really what got me started.
But what do you call yourself? Do you call yourself like a value investor, growth investor, or something else?
No, I think the core thing is that I would call myself a valuation investor, so not necessarily value investing, because I think that idea is more or less dead. So value investing, more or less was pioneered by Benjamin Graham back in the day. So if you read security analysis or some of these old books, security analysis in particular just tells you how to screen stocks. And if you try to apply that today, when we have, screeners that can, analyze the ratios of thousands and millions of companies in seconds, I mean, there's no edge there. Like anyone can do it. But back in those days, when you actually had to get a mail in of, a 10K or, I actually had to do work to find the filings and actually calculate the ratios yourself. That's when value investing actually worked. So trying to like screen for low P ratios or something like that today, I think that idea is more or less dead. So when I say valuation investing, so what I do is typically I analyze a business. I create an intrinsic valuation for that business that reflects the story of the company. And if it's trading below intrinsic value, I would be willing to buy. If it's not, then I'll be patient, which is a kind of a problem for me because, as I mentioned, I like these really robust companies. And those require a lot of patience and discipline because they seldomly trade undervalued. You will often find, companies like FICO, S&P Global, Moody's, all these kind of strong companies, they will often trade overvalued. But if we take
Moody's, for example, I remember last time was trading was cheap was during the financial crisis 2008 2009, right? But you're absolutely right about that. They rarely trade at discounts.
Yeah. So let's just take an example with FICO. I think it's up something like 18,000%, or like 20. Actually, since the financial crisis, since you mentioned, I think it's up like 24,000%. But so you seldomly get these opportunities. But in July, it was announced that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae would start allowing, FICO's competitors to be used in the mortgage origination process there as an alternative to FICO, and FICO dropped 31%. And that is completely rare. So first you have to understand, okay, is this actually a threat to FICO? Is this justified? Is this, oversold? Like what's the meaning behind this? So they started to allow VantageScore, which, as I mentioned, VantageScore has been around for decades and FICO still has over, 95% market share. So let's say, for example, that lender pulls a credit score. It goes through the credit bureaus, the three large ones that own VantageScore. So the ones that use FICO actually have the competitive product. They own VantageScore. So let's say a bank goes to the three bureaus. They get the model from FICO because they have the data. So they create the FICO score. They send it back to the bank. When they send it back to the bank, they also include their own VantageScore for free. And still no one uses them. And that is because FICO score is not interchangeable with it. And that means that for people to actually switch from FICO, which has been, the golden standard
it's the standard, right? It's the gold standard.
That means they would have to re-rate their whole, risk portfolios. They would have to go through a lot and what's the English word now? I'm lost. A lot of regulatory processes. It's not just simply let's just switch. You have to recreate your whole business that is built on FICO and FICO's model. So I was like, okay, this is not a big deal. I purchased FICO. It's like, oh, it's a great opportunity. But yeah, they are very rare. You rarely get, these kind of opportunities in this kind of business. So it requires a lot of patience and discipline to have this approach. But a common misconception when you do care about valuation, which I only do, I only care about intrinsic valuation, is like, well, you'll never be able to buy the NVIDIAs. You'll never be able to buy Palantir, for example. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I bought Palantir. I bought Tesla. I bought, there's just no truth to it because people assume that a high PE ratio or a high price to sales ratio is correlated with intrinsic valuation, but they're not. They're completely different. And that's a common misconception out there, I think.
Well, it's a common misconception that a low PE ratio means cheap and a high PE ratio means expensive, right?
No, that's true. So let's separate the two. So you have valuation and you have pricing. Pricing refers, to price. So price to sales, price to earnings, that is pricing. So that can be cheap and that can be expensive. Palantir, extremely expensive. I mean, what are we talking about? Like over 100 times price to sales. Extremely expensive, right? But that does not mean overvalued or undervalued for that matter. These two are separate. So typically when you listen to CNBC or you talk to like portfolio managers on Wall Street, they will say that, well, it is overvalued, and then they follow it up by saying the P is high. But these two are completely separate. They're not one and the same, but it's an oversimplification that because doing valuation just takes too much time. So I think the only one that actually cares about it these days, on when he goes on CNBC and stuff, is Aswath Damodaran, which is, the most prominent, most renowned valuation professor in the world. I don't know if you're familiar with Aswath Damodaran.
Yeah, I used his book when I was in college.
Yeah, so he also makes that distinct separation between pricing and value. So they are completely different because pricing, it gives you a point in time reference to price. So compared to where the price is trading right now and what the company has performed or is expected to perform in the near term. So you don't get the complete picture. So when you actually do valuation, when you look out 10 years and you try to see the actual narrative, the actual story for the business, I mean, see, here we have Oswald's book, Narrative and Numbers. Like when you actually try to put numbers to the story, that's when you get the valuation for a company. And for Palantir, even though the PE and price to sales was very high, when I actually valued it historically, I would find it, it is trading undervalued. So I bought Palantir. I bought Palantir in the single digits, and now it's trading at 180. And throughout that time, it goes from overvalued to undervalued. Of course, currently, I believe it is overvalued. But I mean, that's just a common misconception that you will never be able to buy these high growth companies if you care about valuation, because that's simply not true. So you have to make that distinct separation from pricing to value, because they are not the same.
When you were talking about the classic, value investor, that today, because you don't have any edge, everybody can do this with the tools. So
Yes.
in today's environment, the way you invest, what's the edge?
My edge, or for the
your edge? What's the edge? Yeah, what's your edge?
It's a good way to put it. I don't typically, so people always say that you need to have alpha to the market. I think the way I view it is that I simply value the business based on what I'm seeing for the business, and often, more often than not, I will find that the business is overvalued. So it means that, well, at this point in time, I'm either not seeing the same story as the market is, or the market, is delusional. So I'm just being patient. So I don't typically see it as, oh, I have this great edge in this industry or in this theme or in this, I cover everything from tech to financials to, credit to, so I don't typically see it the way as, most people like to frame it, like, oh, you have to have an edge. So I value the business, and if I'm very interested in what I'm seeing, then I'm willing to be patient and buy it when it is trading below fair intrinsic value. So it's a very simplified approach, but it's one that allows me to sleep well at night. I think a lot of people, when I see, when I spend a lot of time on X across different finance communities, and you see this common problem, like the stock goes up a lot, and the first question is, oh, should I sell? What should I do? Like, I don't know what to do. Does it deserve to trade here? I don't know. Or if it goes down a lot and they might not be familiar with the business, they have the same kind of panic, but from the opposite side. They're like, oh my God, what do I own? Like, does it deserve to go down? Like, what should I do? So the only way that I find that I can sleep well at night. So let's take Palantir, for example. At one point in time, it was so undervalued that I went 100% of my portfolio in Palantir when it was single digits, because I looked at it. So for those that are not familiar with Palantir, they have a government business and they have a commercial business. And when I valued it, I found out that at today's price, I'm only paying for the government business. Whatever the commercial side does, I get that for free. And that was just, so shocking to me that I would find such an opportunity. So I was comfortable going 100% of my portfolio into that one stock that had been beaten down. People were calling it a black box. It had bad PR in the media. I sort of still does. But I was very confident because I actually did the work. And so I slept well at night. And over time, I was very handsomely rewarded with that investment. So I think the actual edge is actually looking at different businesses and trying to understand them and having narratives for them, putting those narratives into numbers and getting the valuations. So I think if I would say what's my edge, it's that I'm actually actively looking in the market.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to leave my audience with?
Some words of wisdom. Well, you should have prepared me. I don't actually.
Well,
let's leave with the
advice
Lynch,
about your
Peter
process.
Lynch classic. Yeah. Let's leave with the know what you own. I think that's a good Peter Lynch classic that everyone should adapt in their investing life. Know what you own.
Okay. And then if people want to find out more about you, follow you on social media, where can they find you?
Yeah, so throughout my Substack, you can find links to everything. So just go to research.typefcapital.com and you can find the research there, and everything about me is available.